also from my side. My name is Veeli Oeselg, and I'm from the consultation company Civita, which is based in Estonia. And we are currently the ones carrying out the ex-ante evaluation of the Estonian Rural Development Plan for the previous period. Compared to my colleagues who have presented previously, there's quite some major differences, maybe that you would need to know quite already now. The one thing is that we are quite in an early stage with our assessment or evaluation due to the fact that the first public tender failed, as all the proposals exceeded the expected budget. So we started only 2 months ago. And this also derives me to our major challenge. We are assessing during the summer period, where everybody is having vacation, also the beneficiaries, and we still need to finish until the end of the year. And this leads also to my second biggest challenge. Compared to the previous also presentations, we have a couple of evaluation questions more. When you can remember the midterm evaluation, then there were some common evaluation questions connected to the measures, like single measures. There were around 90 evaluation questions that were connected to each measure on the axis. These have been now removed for the ex-post assessment, but not for us. The Estonian ministry still expects that we also cover these 90 questions. So we have the typical common evaluation questions plus 90 additional ones that need to be answered on the level of each measure. Or there are then certain measures that they have to be answered to. But to the agenda, I will briefly tell you where are we currently, what is our methodology approach, what are the data sources we use, and then I bring a practical example. Because as we are currently just launching the primary data collection, then I don't have any findings to present you yet. So you will just get a general understanding how we are approaching the whole assessment, and it's the perfect opportunity to also consult us based on your experience, what to take into consideration, as we are still the possibility to change something in the whole process. We are assessing the previous period. A couple of the grants were also handed out in 2015, so we also cover this period, and the focus is typical to all ex-post evaluations. We cover appropriateness, this means relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, intervention logic, looking into best practices and lessons learned. We started 1st of May and need to finish by the end of the year. And currently, we are just launching primary data collection. That means the first month was dedicated to methodology planning in cooperation with the management authority and also stakeholders and industry experts. And now in June, we just prepared all the questionnaires, because we also use a web-based service for some additional insights from the beneficiaries. And our good thing is that we are doing it in cooperation with the ongoing evaluator who is carrying out the monitorings throughout the whole program, the Estonian University of Agriculture, and we have divided the measures between us. So in total we have a team of 12 people working on it in order to get it done until the end of the year with all the additional questions. And they have also a lot secondary data, because they have assessed the impact throughout the whole period. So we can also rely on some statistics that have been gathered by them. So we have, let's say, a weapon that should ensure our key to success. And we even don't need to go into guessing, as we have so many evaluation questions that we need to cover. We did a profound planning at the beginning of the evaluation. That means for each axis, for each measure, where there is also a certain or separate evaluation question, we developed the evaluation basis. So at the beginning already we set what are the indicators, or what are the data we will use for each measure, for each question, and how we will get this data. We mapped at the beginning right away what we can get from secondary data, what have the monitors gathered during the period, where are some minor data on beneficiary level, because we in Estonia we have quite some good registries on the financial outcomes of the companies based on their financial annual reports. And we also mapped where we need to gather additional data in forms of web service. And this is the conclusion. Similar to Portugal, we use mixed methods, and the choice of method has been done based on what data is there. So we are using in axis 1 and 3 also difference in different methods. There is the University of Agriculture is responsible for these ones. We are using before-after estimators because luckily there were quite some in-depth analysis before the period, so we have a comparison basis. But also then we have literature review, we have web-based service for certain measures where we don't have additional or necessary data on the secondary level, and then of course everything will be validated through focus groups. And there are also 2 case studies planned. One is for the measure 322, what is connected with the broadband internet, and the second one is a bit misleading, it's connected to leader actions. And this is something that will be done in depth, because quite the majority of the budget went also to this area. Coming to the data sources, of course, we will look into input, output, result, and impact indicators, then statistics, analysis, results, and service carried out by the ongoing evaluators, because they have done quite a remarkable job. Then, of course, other relevant industry-specific surveys and studies, because the ministry has also conducted separate studies, as example, connected to the measures on axis 3, and also concerning the modernizations of farms. Then, depending then on each axis, there are additional sources we have, as example, then the financial annual reports I mentioned, that we can also then aggregate on the regional level. Then on the improvements of land, then we have environmental monitoring data, which we can also link with the statistics in the axis 2. And again, for axis 3, also the annual financial reports, and then survey results in axis 4, which was carried out for this. And as today, the measure 1.2 has been a very popular one. To give you also an understanding how we will combine all these different methods into one single and unified outcome, then I will go through this based on one example. Just as a reminder, what is the background of this measure and what have been the outcomes for Estonia. The good thing is we have exceeded all the indicators, and some even on a remarkable level. Especially when we have a look on the cross value added, but there was most probably also planning error already at the beginning that we managed to exceed it with such a high percentage. Then the evaluation questions we have, of course, are the common evaluation questions. How and to what extent has the measure contributed to improving the competitiveness? And the one connected to the implementation of the measures, and what effects derive from it. We have set then this basis for the evaluation. Then the one is the change in the competitive situation, what will be also analyzed with the difference in difference method based on the financial outcomes. And this will be also done in different segments. That means new farmers, farmers who have taken over the farm by parents and taking over the farm from companies. And then also separated by area and separated by regional level. Then for the effects, there will also carry out a survey because there is currently not existing enough data to also see what the beneficiaries think themselves of the effects that they had on their farm. And coming then to these additional questions, what are not mandatory anymore, then we have 4 questions there for this measure. One is connected to the setting up young farmers of either sex. There we have secondary data. And of course, just to validate the outcomes, we also ask for the impact of the aid and their opinion of the beneficiaries about it. Then we have also adjustments of the holdings after the initial establishment of young farmers. There we have again secondary data, and we will ask the beneficiaries on how the predecessors have had an influence on the farms after they took over, if there is still some interference from them. And the last two questions are connected with the capability of the human potential and to which extent the aid contributed to improving the competitiveness. So this is again connected with the first common evaluation question. And for the human potential, as one of the preconditions of GET funding is also the educational background. This is criteria set for the beneficiary. Then we also look into the share of young entrepreneurs with agricultural training among the beneficiaries, and then also the share of young agricultural entrepreneurs who had previous relevant working experience or who had higher education in the field, and also into the age structure. So this is mainly then secondary data. But these are the questions that many of you don't need to cover, and we will do. And as mentioned, then we have secondary data, so the economic indicators of the beneficiaries, then from the Statistics Estonia on regional level, the number of agriculture companies per region, the age information, and then also web surveys carried out for the measure. And first we'll do, of course, the secondary data analysis, the literature review, then the University of Agriculture will carry out the difference in difference analysis, what they already are preparing, and then we will have the web survey and synthesis and then aggregated analysis, because we will look to the level of beneficiaries, but also we need to, of course, assess it on more general terms on the regional level. And what we see, the strengths and weaknesses for this concrete measure, so of course, thanks to the combining of different data sources, we have triangulation. But as we have several sources, we need to also put a lot of attention when combining these sources, because we might not get the unified outcome, but it gives us the same conclusions. Then our benefit is that we have detailed secondary data that we can rely on. But we, of course, from the other hand, as we don't collect so much primary data additionally, then we will perhaps in the end face that we don't have enough data for some certain issues to address during the evaluation questions. Of course, the usage of counterfactual, and one other weakness is that even though we will question or have a web survey for the beneficiaries, then it will be not a single survey only for these beneficiaries, but combined with the measure 1.3. So only those beneficiaries of measure 1.2 will be surveyed who also have received support from the measure 1.2. So we're leaving out the ones who didn't receive funding from only from measure 1.2. So there might be also some subjectivity and the impact from the other measures that we need to take into account. So lessons learned, as we are in such an early stage with our evaluation, then we don't have so many lessons that we have learned until now, and it was a pleasure to learn from your experiences. But for the beginning that we have, for the kickoff of the evaluation, we really recommend everybody to include the ongoing evaluator or the one responsible for the monitoring, because it makes the access to data much more easier, and also you have the necessary background knowledge of the measure from the beginning on if you don't have it from the past. Then what is also for us a really crucial point is the detailed planning that I showed you at the beginning, that right at the beginning we mapped all the data sources and also already identified and agreed with the managing authority what are the indicators and what are the factors that we will assess for each measure and for each evaluation question, so what we will base on. And there are, of course, also some risks that might turn to lessons learned. So there might be that we will, even though that we think currently that we have enough secondary data, that in the end we find some obstacles that we cannot take into account now, or that we are not aware currently. And that also what we can face that especially for the axis 2, that the before-after estimation is not reliable due to the unmeasurable external impact, and also for some modernizations of farms, So this is something that we need to see during the whole process. But these are the two things that we see might turn into problems, but let's see when we get there. So, briefly, that's it.
Yes, thank you very much. You win the quickest presentation of the day award.
Thank you. But as we don't have any findings, then it just makes it a bit easier currently for us, for the presentation at least.
But it's actually very interesting to hear the process, because this is something that also needs to be shared, because quite often there is also only discussion about the results, but also about how you actually get there is important.
Yeah, but it's also important for us to see like what are the problems that others have been facing, because this is for us the most crucial lessons learned for now.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Does anybody have questions on this? I will take, I take 3 questions, and then we have to move onwards. We have other things.
Well, thank you for your presentation. The boat is leaving, so we have to hurry. I have 2 very brief questions. First of all, about the GVA increase. The GVA, gross value added, increase. What is your source for this estimate? Because I suppose this is an estimate. Or this 13 million euro instead of 3.8. And then the second question, how do you select, or how will you select the control group for the DID analysis? Thank you.
Yes, and so since this is a workshop about methodology, really I have to tell you something about methodology. I think that when I understand that you have not read really these guidelines for ex post evaluation. Because if you had read them, you would see that the methods before and after were strongly disregarded and definitely not recommended. Okay? So before, after, this method has a lot of problems. Okay. The second method that you use difference in differences. You can use this method only under very strong assumption that beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries are pretty much the same. If for instance, your beneficiaries were better in general, irrespectively on the program, so better farmers, let's say, more educated, with higher skills, that when you use this difference in difference method, starting with this different group of beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries, your results will be completely biased. So therefore, my second question is, should avoid also this method. So it means you have to, coming back to the first question, you have to somehow come up to a reasonable building of control groups, which you have not done. Okay, and then regarding survey, I mean, one should not underestimate survey, but in the survey, you can ask questions, not direct questions like, for instance, what is your gross value added? You will not ask this question to the farmer. You ask question, how many cows you have, what is your field area, how much you sold, of these things, what were your costs, etc., in order to arrive to gross value added. But you should use surveys in case you don't have other sources of information and data. But you should, as I said, you should not use the surveys in this most straightforward way, but differently.
Thank you. My name is Pia Nilsson. I think that maybe what you were trying to say is that you need to look at your data before you can decide on what method to apply. And I'm not really quite sure if I follow what you said on difference in difference, because I think that it's actually the exact opposite to what you said. I think that that's the type of method you should apply when you don't have a random assignment. So you have differences between the group. You have the support directed to the largest and the best performing firms. Then that would be a way, which is usually the case. I would say. Since we have these selection criteria and eligibility conditions, and they are the same across countries, so your data should have the same bias, I suppose.
But the bias is expected to stay constant over years.
Why is that the case?
Difference, because this is the crucial assumption. The bias will stay constant, and it doesn't need to stay constant.
But I think, yeah, well, of course, since the criteria remain constant and the conditions for receiving support remain constant, then of course the bias will remain constant. But what I'm trying to say is that I think it's difficult to just decide upon the method before looking at the data, because it's the data that drives the way you ultimately decide to do. But it sounds as a very ambitious approach, definitely, and very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. So coming to the first, to the cross value added, very easy answer currently. This number is presented by the ongoing evaluators. So I haven't validated it. It's presented by the ministry to me, the data that we have about the indicators, so I cannot really elaborate on this. Coming to the control group, and perhaps I will take it together also with the difference in different method comment and looking at the data beforehand. First of all, the comments were quite in detail, and I cannot reply in such a detail because the responsible for carrying out this task is the Ministry, or is the University of Agriculture. So they are doing all this counterfaction and quasi-experimental analysis. They have looked into the data, and they have also formulated they have tested this approach or this method already before we proposed it in the evaluation, and they made sure and convinced themselves that they have good basis for control groups in order to carry out this analysis. So they did this pre-work. Of course, I will give you a message towards them, but it's something that they had already tested during the whole period. So for the midterm evaluation, they already tried to carry out the first analysis. And the selection of the measures where we can use counterfactual analysis as such has been also let's say they had a profound analysis as a basis to identify these measures that we can use this at all, because as you pointed also out, the control groups is a very important question, and Estonia is very small. And that means that we have many companies, we don't have so many companies who haven't received funding at all. We have almost no companies who haven't received funding in the different periods. And of course, also, as the number of companies or farms is also rather limited, then comparison might be limited in some certain subgroups because there is not enough beneficiaries to compare with. So it's an issue we have in Estonia, and also the issue that we are taking into account. And coming then about the before and after, I have read it, sorry. But this is also something that it's, let's say, how to put it. It's something that our evaluation partners are heavily believing in. Let's put it this way, unfortunately. But luckily, as we have also different methods and we have this triangulation, then we can also minimize a bit the weaknesses of this measure, but we are aware of.
Thank you very much for keeping up not only with the noises from outside, where one emergency seems to chase the other one, but also for being so brave to answer to all these questions. And congratulations that you have read the guide.
I guess it's something that everybody needs to do who's involved in evaluation.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.